Let me start with a truth that might hit you hard, and I hope it does. You thought the narcissist broke you. You thought the gaslighting, the manipulation, the silent treatments, you thought that was the worst part. That the betrayal, the confusion, the erosion of your self-worth was the peak of your pain. But let me tell you something that's going to shift everything. That wasn't the end. That was the test. The real test wasn't surviving the narcissist. It's who you decide to become after the damage is done. It's whether you choose to stay broken or whether you finally rise, rebuild, and reclaim every single part of yourself that they tried to erase. This is the moment you stop reliving the past and start rewriting the story. Not their story, yours. You thought you were broken because of what they did. The gaslighting, the emotional highs and lows, the constant walking on eggshells. It was like being on a roller coaster that only went downhill, fast. And when it finally ended, you weren't even sure who you were anymore. You looked in the mirror and didn't recognize yourself. But here's the truth. You were never broken. You were never weak. You were not too sensitive, too needy, or too much. The narcissist didn't break you. What they did was expose the cracks that were already there. Cracks you've been covering with perfectionism, people-pleasing, and pretending to be fine. That relationship didn't create your insecurities. It revealed them. It magnified them. It pushed every button you had over and over until you finally had to face them. And I know that sounds harsh, but sometimes pain is the only thing loud enough to make us stop and pay attention. Because before them, maybe you were already ignoring the warning signs in your life. You were already compromising your needs. You were already unsure of your worth. And the narcissist? They walked into that vulnerability like they owned it, because you didn't. Let's be real. Narcissists are masters of illusion. They reflect back to you exactly what you want to see until they don't. They twist your words, rewrite reality, and slowly chip away at your confidence until you start doubting your own sanity. But the reason it hurts so deeply is because somewhere inside, part of you was already questioning your value. That's what they hooked onto. That's where they found their entry point. They didn't break you. They found the parts of you that were already unhealed and made you stare directly at them. Now, I know how easy it is to stay angry, to stay stuck in "they did this to me" mode. And listen, I'm not excusing anything they did, manipulation, abuse, control, none of that is okay, ever. But if you stay in that space, you miss the bigger picture, because this isn't just about what they did. This is about what you do next. You're not responsible for the trauma, but you are responsible for the healing. That's the part nobody tells you. Healing isn't just about crying and journaling and listening to podcasts. It's about facing the hard truth that you gave someone else the power to define your worth. And now it's time to take it back. There is power in that awareness. There is freedom in it. Because once you realize that you weren't broken by them, that they simply exposed what you needed to finally deal with, you shift from victim to creator. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this here to teach me?" That's where the real test begins. That's the moment you stop bleeding from the wound and start building the muscle. What they showed you, as painful as it was a version of you that needed to rise, not the version that hides, that shrinks, that bends to keep others comfortable, the version that reclaims her voice, her standards, her damn life. This isn't about them anymore. It never really was. This is about you seeing yourself clearly, finally, and choosing to become the person you were always meant to be. You want to know what one of the most damaging parts of being in a relationship with a narcissist is? It's not the arguments. It's not even the betrayals. It's the slow, subtle erosion of your ability to trust yourself, the gaslighting, the constant denial of your reality. That's what really screws with your head. You'd feel something was off and they'd look you dead in the eye and say, "You're overreacting." You'd catch them in a lie and they'd spin it so fast that you ended up apologizing. That's not just manipulation. That's psychological warfare. And over time, it does something dangerous. It disconnects you from your own inner knowing. That gut instinct you used to rely on, silenced. That little voice inside that said something's not right, dismissed. You became trained like a reflex to doubt yourself. Every reaction, every boundary, every question you had was made to feel wrong. And it didn't happen overnight. That's what makes it so insidious. It happens one excuse at a time, one twisted conversation at a time, until you start thinking, maybe it is me. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I do need to calm down. But let me be very clear. It was never about you being too much. It was always about them needing you to be less so they could stay in control. And here's where the real healing begins. When you decide you're done outsourcing your truth to someone else. When you stop asking for permission to feel what you feel. When you stop needing validation for your pain. Rebuilding trust in yourself starts with taking back your voice, the one that got buried under their lies and your self-doubt. You stop gaslighting yourself the way they used to. You stop talking yourself out of what you know in your gut just because it might make someone else uncomfortable. Do you want to know what inner knowing really is? It's not some mystical superpower. It's the quiet voice of lived experience, intuition, and truth. And it's still there. Even after all that confusion and chaos, it didn't go anywhere. You've just got to get still enough to hear it again. And that's hard at first. I know. Because silence can feel terrifying after all the noise. But that silence is where you reconnect with your instincts, where you start rebuilding the foundation of your self-trust. You'll question everything in the beginning. That's normal. You'll second-guess yourself, wondering, is this really toxic? Or am I just being dramatic? That's the residue of the gaslighting. You got to work through it, one decision at a time, one boundary at a time. You start listening to your body, how it tightens, how it flinches, how it warns you. You start taking note of your own energy, who drains it, who respects it. That's your new compass. And when you slip, because you will, don't beat yourself up. That's not a failure. That's feedback. You're reprogramming years of conditioning. Give yourself the grace you gave to the narcissist, and then double it. Because you are not crazy. You never were. You were gaslit into silence, and now you're learning how to hear yourself again. That is power eventually. It clicks. That moment when you set a boundary and don't explain it. When you say no and don't feel guilty. When you trust your gut and it leads you to peace, not drama. That's when you know you are coming home to yourself. That's when you stop needing someone else to tell you who you are. And when that happens, when you truly begin to trust your own voice again, nobody gets to rewrite your reality ever again. Not them, not anyone. Let's talk about pain. Not just the kind that hurts, but the kind that reflects. Because whether you realize it or not, that relationship was a mirror. Everything you experienced, the manipulation, the dismissal, the emotional neglect, it wasn't just random cruelty. It was a reflection of what you unconsciously believed about yourself. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because it's easier to say they were just toxic than it is to say something in me tolerated that. But if you want real healing, not just surface level closure, you have to be willing to look in that mirror without flinching. Pain is a teacher. It doesn't show up because life is cruel. It shows up because you've been ignoring something important for way too long. And that narcissist, as twisted as it sounds, they were just the messenger. They brought every wound to the surface, every abandonment you never processed, every unmet need you buried, every part of you that never felt worthy of love unless you were proving, fixing, or sacrificing yourself. You weren't just in a toxic relationship, you were reliving old stories. You were trying to win love from someone emotionally unavailable because that felt familiar. So stop asking, why did they treat me like that? And start asking, why did I accept it? That's where your power is, not in blaming yourself, but in reclaiming responsibility for your healing. Because the truth is, we attract relationships at the level of our self-worth. And when you don't feel safe inside yourself, you'll chase chaos on the outside. When you've been taught that love means earning approval, you'll confuse emotional unavailability with intensity. You'll call anxiety butterflies. You'll call inconsistency passion. You'll call emotional neglect independence. But what you're really doing is reenacting patterns that started long before them. It might have started in childhood with a parent who only gave affection when you behaved a certain way. Or maybe you were always the caretaker, praised for being strong, for not having needs. So when someone came along who made it all about them, who needed constant attention, who fed off your empathy, it made perfect sense. You already knew how to disappear for someone else. You were trained for it. But now that you see it, you can choose differently. That pain you felt, it was never just about them. It was about the part of you screaming to be seen, the part of you that needed to be reminded that love doesn't require shrinking, that boundaries aren't selfish, that you are not here to be a mirror for someone else's ego. You are not a rehab center for broken people who refuse to heal. You are not here to prove your worth through suffering. So let that pain show you where the healing still needs to happen. Let it point to the places in you that need more love, not less. Let it guide you back to your truth, not the version of you that hustles for worthiness, but the version that knows they were always enough. You don't need to fix the past, you just need to stop repeating it. And that begins when you recognize what the pain was trying to tell you all along. It's okay to grieve what you went through. It's okay to feel angry, sad, confused. But don't stop there. Use it. Turn it into clarity. Turn it into standards. Turn it into non-negotiables. Let the mirror become a map. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can never unsee it. You'll stop choosing people who reflect your wounds and start choosing people who reflect your growth. This is the part where you stop asking for closure and start creating transformation. You don't need them to admit what they did. You don't need a perfect explanation. You just need to own your part, do the work, and make. I'm sure you never hand your reflection over to someone who doesn't respect it. There comes a moment after the narcissist is gone, after the texts stop, after the chaos dies down, when everything gets quiet. And that silence, it feels deafening. Because now it's just you. No one to blame, no one to fix, no one to chase. Just you and the aftermath. And that's when the real test begins. See, surviving the narcissist was just phase one. That was about endurance. That was about instinct, about making it through the storm without being completely wiped out. But what comes after, the rebuilding, the reclaiming, the redefining of who you are, that's the part nobody prepares you for. Because now it's not about reacting to someone else's dysfunction. It's about choosing who you're going to be when no one else is steering the wheel but you. And here's what makes it so hard. Part of you got comfortable in the chaos, not because you liked it, but because at least you knew how it worked. When you're constantly defending yourself, constantly proving, constantly managing someone else's moods, you don't have time to look at your own wounds. But now that it's just you, no distractions, no drama, that's when the real stuff starts bubbling up, the stuff you buried, the parts of yourself you abandoned just to survive. This is the test. Can you sit with the discomfort instead of running back to something familiar? Can you resist the urge to fill the void with another fixer-upper, another person to save, another emotional project that keeps you focused on anyone but yourself? Can you be alone, not lonely, but alone, long enough to remember who the hell you were before the narcissist ever got to you? Because let me be honest, healing is not glamorous. It's not all bubble baths and meditation apps. Sometimes it looks like crying on your kitchen floor. Sometimes it looks like deleting their number for the 10th time. Sometimes it looks like saying no when every trauma pattern in your body is screaming to say yes. The test isn't whether you can forget what happened. It's whether you can choose differently the next time. It's in the small moments when you feel the pull to reach out just to feel seen again, and you don't. When you notice someone's red flags and instead of rationalizing them, you walk away. When you catch yourself people-pleasing, apologizing for existing, and you stop mid-sentence because you remember you are allowed to take up space. That's how you know you're passing the test. The real test is about identity. Who are you now that you're not shrinking to fit someone else's version of you? Who are you when you stop performing? When you stop trying to earn love and start being love first for yourself and then for others? It's your invitation to step into that version of you that doesn't tolerate crumbs, that doesn't explain basic needs, that doesn't stay small to keep the peace. And it's not about being perfect. You'll mess up, you'll backslide, you'll second guess yourself. That's human. But the difference now, you'll catch it faster, you'll recover quicker, you'll be more honest with yourself. That's growth. That's resilience. That's the real test. And you're already in it. At some point in your healing, there comes a shift. It's the moment when survival isn't enough anymore. You're done just getting by, done just analyzing what happened, done replaying the pain on a loop. Now it's about reclaiming what was stolen. Your power, your voice, your identity. Because here's the truth. The narcissist didn't just hurt you emotionally. They trained you to forget who you are. When you're in a relationship like that, your sense of self gets chipped away bit by bit. At first, it's subtle. You laugh a little less. You second guess yourself more. You start adjusting, adapting, trying to avoid their moods. You learn how to read the room instead of listening to your gut. You abandon your needs just to keep the peace. Before long, you're not sure where you end and they begin. And when it's over, you're left with this hollow feeling, like you're standing in the ruins of a life that no longer fits. But here's the thing about ruins. They're also foundations. That emptiness you feel, that's space. Space to rebuild. Space to take up room in your own damn life. This is where you reclaim your power. Not in loud, performative ways, but in grounded, consistent action. It starts with boundaries, real ones, not just saying no to others, but saying yes to yourself. You stop explaining why you deserve to be respected. You stop justifying your needs. You stop tolerating disrespect just because you're afraid of being alone. And yes, that's hard, because boundaries are uncomfortable at first, especially when you've been taught that love means bending, sacrificing, and staying quiet. But boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They keep out what drains life you and allow in what nourishes you. Every time you honor a boundary, you're teaching yourself that you matter, that your energy is valuable, that peace is not something you beg for, it's something you protect. Then comes the identity work. Who are you without the trauma, without the fear, without constantly being in fight or flight mode? That's when you start reclaiming the parts of you that got buried. Maybe you stopped writing. Maybe you stopped laughing. Maybe you stopped trusting yourself. You start picking those pieces back up, not because someone else finally sees your worth, but because you do. And this time, you're not building a version of yourself to be chosen. You're building a version of yourself that is so aligned, so whole, that anyone who can't meet you there really doesn't get access. And let's talk about self-respect. Not the kind you post about online, but the kind you live by in private. Self-respect is choosing not to engage when someone tries to bait you back into dysfunction. It's walking away from drama. Not because you're afraid, but because you value peace more than proving a point. It's knowing your worth so clearly that you stop chasing closure and start becoming it. Because closure isn't something they give you. It's something you create when you stop looking outside yourself for answers. Reclaiming power doesn't mean becoming hard or guarded. It means becoming rooted. It means knowing who you are so deeply that no one gets to rewrite your story. It's the quiet confidence of walking into a room and not needing to prove anything. It's trusting yourself to handle whatever comes, not because you won't ever get hurt again, but because you know you'll rise if you do. This isn't about being better than anyone. It's about being better for you. It's about no longer abandoning yourself just to be accepted by someone else. It's about standing in the mirror and saying, I know who I am, and I'm not shrinking again. There's a moment that comes after you've done the crying, the questioning, the grieving, after you've pulled yourself out of that dark hole and started to breathe again. It's quiet at first, but then it gets louder. It says, this can't be where the story ends. And you're right, it's not. Because what you went through wasn't just for survival. It was preparation. It was sharpening. It was fire. And now your job is to do something with it, to turn what almost broke you into something that builds others, to shift from surviving to leading. And no, that doesn't mean you have to go start a podcast or write a book or stand on a stage unless you want to. Leading doesn't mean you have to shout your story from the rooftops. Leading means you live your truth so unapologetically that it gives other people permission to do the same. It means you stop hiding your scars and start using them as evidence of what's possible. Because there's people out there right now sitting in the exact pain you pulled yourself out of, and they don't see a way through. You get to be living proof that healing is real. There's a power in owning your story, not just as something that happened to you, but as something you grew through, not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of wisdom. The kind of wisdom that doesn't just speak to pain, it understands it. The kind of wisdom that doesn't preach, it connects. Because when you've walked through the fire, people can feel it. They can hear it in your voice, see it in your presence. That kind of strength can't be faked. It's not about being invincible. It's about being authentic. And let's be clear, being a leader doesn't mean you never struggle again. It means when the struggle comes, you know how to face it. It means you don't run from your triggers. You unpack them. You don't numb your feelings. You move through them. You don't go back to what hurt just because it's familiar. You choose differently, even when it's hard. That's leadership. That's courage. That's what changes lives. Not just yours, but the lives of every person who crosses your path. You start to realize that your story is your superpower. That every breakdown, every rock bottom moment, every time you thought, I'll never get through this, was actually shaping you into someone with depth, with clarity, with strength. Someone who can hold space for others, someone who doesn't just speak about healing but embodies it. You don't have to fix anyone. You don't have to rescue anyone. You just have to be you, fully, freely, and without apology. That's how you lead, with your presence, with your example, with your refusal to stay small. People watch that. People feel that. You show them by the way you carry yourself that it's safe to leave dysfunction, that it's possible to rebuild from nothing, that it's not too late to start again. And what happens next is beautiful. Your life becomes a mirror for what's possible. You stop attracting chaos because you're no longer available for it. You stop getting lost in someone else's story because you're finally writing your own. You become someone who doesn't just talk about boundaries, you embodies them. Who doesn't just hope for healing, you lives it. And without even trying, you light the way for others. That's what this was all leading to. That's why you had to go through what you did, not to break you, but to wake you up. You're not here just to recover. You're here to rise and then help others do the same just by being fully, fiercely, and fearlessly yourself.